want my nephews to read this one day, and I'd love for them to hear me read it too, to them. The Phantom Tollbooth, Norton Juster, illustrated by Jules Pfeiffer. With an appreciation by Maurice Sendak. The maps in the first part of the book are the best parts. The most fun. An appreciation. One, Milo. There once was a boy named Milo who didn't know what to do with himself. Not just sometimes, but always. When he was in school, he longed to be out, and when he was out, he longed to be in. On the way, he thought about coming home, and coming home, he thought about going. Wherever he was, he wished he were somewhere else. And when he got there, he wondered why he'd bothered. Nothing really interested him. Least of all the things that should have. It seems to me that almost everything is a waste of time, he remarked one day as he walked dejectedly home from school. I can't see the point in learning to solve useless problems, or subtracting turnips from turnips, or knowing where Ethiopia is or how to spell February. And since no one bothered to explain otherwise, he regarded the process of seeking knowledge as the greatest waste of time of all. As he and his unhappy thoughts hurried along, for while he was never anxious to be where he was going, he liked to get there as quickly as possible. It seemed a great wonder that the world, which was so large, could sometimes feel so small and empty. And worst of all, he continued sadly, there's nothing for me to do, nowhere I'd care to go, and hardly anything worth seeing. He'd punctuated his last thought with such a deep sigh that a house sparrow singing nearby stopped and rushed home to be with his family. Without stopping or looking up, Milo dashed past the buildings and busy shops that lined the streets in a few minutes and reached home, dashed through the lobby, hopped into the elevator, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and off again. Opened the apartment door, rushed into his room, flopped dejectedly into a chair, and grumbled softly. Another long afternoon. He looked glumly at all the things he'd owned, all the books that were too much trouble to read, the tools he had never learned to use, the small electric automobile he hadn't driven in months, or was it years, and the hundreds of other games and toys and bats and balls and bits and pieces scattered around him. And then, to one side of the room, just next to the phonograph, he noticed something he had certainly never seen before. Who could have possibly left such an enormous package, and such a strange one? For while it was not quite square, it was definitely not round, and for its size, it was larger than most of any other big package of smaller dimension than he had ever seen. Attached to one side was a bright blue envelope, which said simply, "For Milo, who has plenty of time." Of course, if you've ever gotten a surprise package, you can imagine how puzzled and excited Milo was. And if you've never gotten one, pay close attention, because someday you might. "I don't think it's my birthday," he puzzled, "and Christmas must be months away. And I haven't been outstandingly good, or even good at all." He had to admit this even to himself. "Most possibly I won't like it anyway, but since I don't know where it came from, I can't possibly send it back." He thought about it for quite a while, and then opened the envelope. But just to be polite, "One genuine Turnpike Tollbooth," it stated, and then it went on. "Easily assembled at home, and for use by those who have never traveled in lands beyond." Beyond what? Thought Milo as he continued to read. "This package contains the following items: 1. Genuine turnpike toll booth to be erected according to directions. 3. Precautionary signs to be used in a precautionary fashion. Assorted coins for use in paying tolls. 1 map, up to date and carefully drawn by master cartographers, depicting natural and man-made features. 1 book of rules and traffic regulations, which may not be bent or broken." And in smaller letters at the bottom it concluded, "Results are not guaranteed, but if not perfectly satisfied, your wasted time will be refunded." Following the instructions, which told him to cut here, lift there, and fold all back around, he soon had the toll booth unpacked and set up on its stand. He fitted the windows in place and attached the roof, which extended on to both sides, and fastened on the coin box. It was very much like the toll booths he had seen many times on family trips, except of course it was much smaller and purple. What a strange present, he thought to himself. The least they could have done was to send a highway with it, for it's terribly impracticable without one. But since, at the time, there was nothing else he wanted to play with, he set up the 3 signs. "Slow down, approaching toll booth. Please have your fare ready. Have your destination in mind," and slowly unfolded the map. As the announcement stated, it was a beautiful map in many colors, showing principal roads, rivers and seas, towns and cities, mountains and valleys, intersections and detours, and sites of outstanding interest both beautiful and historic. The only trouble was that Milo had never heard of any of these places it indicated, and even the names sounded most peculiar. "I don't think there really is such a country," he concluded after studying it carefully. "Well, it doesn't matter anyway," and he closed his eyes and poked a finger at the map. "Dictionopolis," read Milo slowly. "Oh well, I might as well go there as anywhere." He walked across the room and dusted the car off carefully. Then, taking the map and rule book with him, he hopped in. For lack of anything better to do, drove slowly up to the toll booth. As he deposited his coin and rolled past, he remarked wistfully, "I do hope this is an interesting game. Otherwise, this afternoon will be so terribly dull." Beyond expectations. Suddenly, he found himself speeding along an unfamiliar country highway, and as soon as he looked back over his shoulder, neither the toll booth, nor his room, nor even the house was anywhere in sight. What had started as make-believe was now very real. What a strange thing to have happen, he thought, just as you must be thinking right now. This game is much more serious than I thought, for here I am, riding on a road I've never seen, going to a place I've never heard of, and all because of a toll booth, which came from nowhere. I'm certainly glad that it's a nice day for a trip, he concluded hopefully, for at the moment, this was the one thing he definitely knew. The sun sparkled, the sky was clear, and all the colors he saw seemed to be richer and brighter than he could even remember. The flowers shone as if they'd been cleaned and polished, and the tall trees that lined the road shimmered in silvery green. "Welcome to Expectations," said a carefully lettered sign on a small house at the side of the road. Information, predictions, and advice cheerfully offered. Park here and blow horn. With the first sound from the horn, a little man in a long coat came rushing from the house, speaking as fast as he could and repeating everything several times. My, welcome, 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 welcome to the land of expectations. To the land of expectations, to the land of expectations. We don't get many travelers these days. We certainly don't get many travelers these days. Now, what can I do for you? I'm the weatherman. Is this the right road for Dictionopolis? Asked Milo, a little bowled over by the effusive greeting. Well now, he began. I don't know if any wrong road to Dictionopolis, so if this road goes to Dictionopolis at all, it must be the right road, and if it doesn't, it must be the right road to somewhere else, because there are no wrong roads to anywhere. Do you think it will rain? I thought you were the weatherman, said Milo, very confused. Oh no, said the little man. I'm the weatherman, not the weatherman. For all, it's more important to know whether there will be a weather than what the weather will be. And with that, he realized a dozen balloons. He released a dozen balloons and sailed off into the sky. Must see which way the wind is blowing, he said, chuckling over his little joke and watching them disappear in all directions. What kind of place is Expectations? Inquired Milo, unable to see the humor and feeling very doubtful of the little man's sanity. Good question, he exclaimed. Expectations is the place you must always go before you go to get anywhere you're going. Of course, some people never go beyond expectations, but my job is to hurry them along whether they like it or not. Now what else can I do for you? And before Milo could reply, he rushed into the house and reappeared a moment later with a new coat and an umbrella. I think I can find my own way, said Milo, not at all sure that he could, but since he didn't understand the little man at all, he decided that he might as well move on, at least until he met someone whose sentences didn't always sound as if they would make as much sense backwards as forwards. Splendid, exclaimed the weatherman. Whether or not you find your own way, you're bound to find some way. If you happen to find my way, please return it, as it was lost years ago. I imagine by now it's quite rusty. You did say it was going to rain, didn't you? And with that, he opened the umbrella and looked up nervously. I'm glad you made your own decision. I do so hate to make up my mind about anything, whether it's good or bad or up or down, in or out, rain or shine. Expect everything now, I always say, and the unexpected never happens. Now please drive carefully. Goodbye, 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 good. His last goodbye was drowned out by an enormous clap of thunder. As Milo drove down the road in the bright sunshine, he could see the weatherman standing in the middle of the fierce cloudburst that seemed to be raining only on him. The road dipped down now into a broad green valley and stretched toward the horizon. The little car bounced along with very little effort, and Milo had hardly to touch the accelerator to go as fast as he wanted. He was glad to be on his way. It's all very well to spend time in expectations, he thought, but talking to that strange man all day would certainly get me nowhere. He's the most peculiar person I've ever met, continued Milo, unaware of how many peculiar people he would shortly encounter. As he drove along the peaceful highway, he soon fell to daydreaming and paid less and less attention to where he was going. In a short time, he wasn't paying any attention at all. And that is why, at a fork in the road, when a sign pointed to the left, Milo went to the right. Along a route which looked suspiciously like the wrong way, things began to change as soon as he left the main highway. The sky became quite grey, and along with it, the whole countryside seemed to lose its colour and assume the same monotonous tone. Everything was quiet, and even the air hung heavily. The birds sang only grey songs, and the road wound back and forth in an endless series of climbing curves. Mile after mile after mile after mile. Mile he drove, and now gradually the car went slower and slower until it was hardly moving at all. It looks as though I'm getting nowhere, yawned Milo, becoming very drowsy and dull. I hope I haven't taken a wrong turn. Mile after mile after mile after mile. Mile, and everything became grayer and more monotonous. Finally, the car just stopped altogether, and hard as he tried, it wouldn't budge another inch. I wonder where I am, said Milo in a very weary tone. You're in the doldrums, wailed a voice that sounded very far away. He looked around quickly to see who had spoken. No one was there, and it was as quiet, as still as one could imagine. Yes, the doldrums, yawned another voice, but still saw no one. What are the doldrums? He cried loudly, and tried very hard to see who would answer this time. The doldrums, my young friend, are where nothing ever happens and nothing ever changes. This time, the voice came from so close that Milo jumped with surprise, for sitting on his right shoulder so lightly that he hardly noticed was a small creature, exactly the color of his shirt. Allow me to introduce all of us, the creature went on. We are the Lethargians, at your service. Milo looked around, and for the first time noticed dozens of them, sitting on the car, standing in the road, and lying all over the trees and bushes. They were very difficult to see, because whatever they happened to be sitting on or near was exactly the color they happened to be. Each one looked much like the other, except for the color, of course, and some looked even more like each other than they did like themselves. "I'm very pleased to meet you," said Milo, not sure whether he was pleased at all. "I think I'm lost. Can you help me, please?" "Don't say think," said one sitting on a shoe, for the one on his shoulder had fallen asleep. "It's against the law." He yawned and fell off to sleep too. "No one's allowed to think in the doldrums," continued a third, beginning to doze off, and as each one spoke, he fell off to sleep and picked up another conversation with hardly any interruption. "Don't you have a rule book? It's local ordinance 175-389-J. Milo quickly pulled the rule book from his pocket, opened to the page, and read Ordinance 175-389-J. "It shall be unlawful, illegal, and unethical to think of thinking, surmise, presume, reason, meditate, or speculate whether the doldrums, while in the doldrums. Anyone breaking this law shall be severely punished." "That's a ridiculous law," said Milo quite indignantly. "Everybody thinks." "We don't," shouted the Thorgians all at once. "And most of the time, you don't," said a yellow one sitting on a daffodil. "That's why you're here. You weren't thinking, and you weren't paying attention either. People who don't pay attention often get stuck in the doldrums." And with that, they toppled out of the flower and fell snoring onto the grass. Milo couldn't help laughing at the little creature's strange behavior, even though he knew it might be a little rude. "Stop that at once," ordered the plaid one, clinging to his stocking. "Laughing is against the law. Don't you have a rule book?" "It's local ordinance 574-381-W. Opening the book once again, Milo found Ordinance 574-381-W. In the doldrums, laughter is frowned upon, and smiling is permitted only on an alternate Thursday. Violators shall be dealt with most harshly. "Well, if you can't laugh or think, what can you do?" asked Milo. "Anything, as long as it's nothing, and everything as long as it isn't anything," explained another. "There's lots to do. We have a very busy schedule. At 8 o'clock, we get up, and then we spend from 8 to 9 daydreaming. From 9 to 9:30, we take our mid-morning nap. From 9:30 to 10:30, we dawdle and delay. From 10:30 to 11:30, we take our early late morning nap. From 11:30 to 12, we bide our time and then eat lunch. From 1 to 2, we linger and loiter. From 2 to 2:30, we take our early afternoon nap. From 2:30 to 3:30, we put off tomorrow what we could have done today. From 3:30 to 4, we take our early late afternoon nap. From 4 to 5, we loaf and lounge until dinner. From 6 to 7, we dilly-dally. From 7 to 8, we take our early evening nap. And then for an hour before we go to bed at 9, we waste time. As you can see, that leaves almost no time for brooding, lagging, plodding, or procrastinating. If we stop to think or laugh, we never get anything done. You mean you never get anything done? Corrected Milo. We don't want to get anything done, snapped another angrily. We want to get nothing done, and we can do that without your help. You see, continued another in a more conciliatory tone, it's really quite strenuous doing nothing all day. So once a week we take a holiday and go nowhere, which was just where we were going to go when you came along. Would you care to join us? I might as well, thought Milo. That's where I seem to be going anyway. Tell me, he yawned, for he felt ready for a nap now himself. Does everyone here do nothing? Everyone but the terrible watchdog, said 2 of them, shuddering in chorus. It's always sniffing around to see that nobody wastes time. A most unpleasant character. The watchdog, said Milo quizzically. The watchdog, shouted another, fainting from fright, for racing down the road, barking furiously, kicking up a great cloud of dust, was the very dog of whom they had been speaking. Run! Wake up! Run! Here he comes! The watchdog! Great shouts filled the air as the Lothargians scattered in all directions and soon disappeared entirely. Goodness! Exclaimed the watchdog as he dashed up to the car, loudly puffing and panting, Milo's eyes open wide. For there in front of him was a large dog with a perfectly normal head, 4 feet, and a tail, and the body of a loudly ticking alarm clock. What are you doing here? Growled the watchdog. What are you doing here? No. Just killing time, replied Milo apologetically. You see, killing time, roared the dog, so furiously that his alarm went off. It's bad enough wasting time without killing it. And he shuddered at the thought. Why are you in the doldrums anyway? Don't you have anywhere to go? I was on my way to Dictionopolis when I got stuck here, explained Milo. Can you help me? Help you? You must help yourself, the dog replied, carefully winding himself with his hind leg. I suppose you know why you got stuck. I guess I just wasn't thinking, said Milo. Precisely, shouted the dog as his alarm went off again. Now you know what you must do. I'm afraid I don't, admitted Milo, feeling quite stupid. Well, continued the watchdog impatiently, since you got here not by thinking, it seems reasonable to expect that in order to get out, you must start thinking. And with that, he hopped into the car. Do you mind if I get in? I love automobile rides. Milo began to think as hard as he could, which was very difficult. Since he wasn't used to it, he thought of birds that swim and fish that fly. He thought of yesterday's lunch and tomorrow's dinner. He thought of words that began with J and numbers that end in 3. And as he thought, the wheels began to turn. "We're moving, we're moving," he shouted happily. "Keep thinking," scolded the watchdog. The little car started to go faster and faster as Milo's brain whirled with activity, and down the road it went. In a few moments, they were out of the doldrums and back on the main highway. All the colors had returned to the original brightness. As they raced along the road, Milo continued to think of all sorts of things. Of the many detours and wrong tours, wrong turns that were so easy to take, how fine it was to be moving along, and most of all, of how much could be accomplished with just a little thought. And the dog, his nose in the wind, just sat back, watchfully ticking. Welcome to Dictionopolis. "You must excuse my gruff conduct," the watchdog said, after they've been driving for some time. "But you see, it's traditional for watchdogs to be ferocious." Milo was so relieved at having escaped the doldrums that he assured the dog that he bore no ill will to him, and in fact was very grateful for the assistance. "Splendid!" shouted the watchdog. "I'm very pleased. I'm sure we'll be great friends for the rest of the trip. You may call me Talk." "That is a strange name for a dog who goes tick, 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 tick all day," said Milo. "Why didn't they call you—" "Don't say it," gasped the dog, and Milo could see a tear well up in his eye. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings," said Milo, not meaning to hurt his feelings. "It's all right," said the dog, getting a hold of himself. "It's an old story, and a sad one, but I can tell it to you now. When my brother was born, the first pup in the family, my parents were overjoyed and immediately named him Tick, in expectation of the sound they were sure he'd make. On first winding him, they discovered to their horror that, instead of going tick, 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 he went tock, 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 tock. They rushed to the Hall of Records to change the name, but too late. It had already been officially inscribed, and nothing could be done. When I arrived, they were determined not to make the same mistake twice, and since it seemed logical that all their children would make the same sound, they named me Talk, of course, and you know the rest. My brother is called Tick because he goes talk, 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 and I am called Talk because I go tick, 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 tick. And both of us are forever burdened with wrong names. My parents were so overwrought that they gave up having any children and devoted their lives to doing good work amongst the poor and the hungry. "But how did you become a watchdog?" interjected Milo, hoping to change the subject, as Talk was sobbing quite loudly now. "That," he said, rubbing his paw to his eye, "is also traditional. My family have always been watchdogs, from father to son, almost since time began. You see," he continued, feeling a bit better, "once there was no time at all, and people found it very inconvenient. They never knew whether they were eating lunch or dinner, and they were always missing trains. So time was invented to help them keep track of the day and get places when they should be. When they began to count all the time that was available, what with 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, and 365 days in a year, it seemed as if there was much more than could ever be used. If there's so much more than ever could be used, it couldn't be very valuable, was the general opinion, and it soon fell in dispute. People wasted it and even gave it away. Then we were given the job of seeing that no one wasted time again, he said, sitting up proudly. It's hard work, but a noble calling. For you see, and now he was standing on the seat, 1 foot on the windshield, shouting with his arms outstretched. It is our most valuable possession, more precious than diamonds. It marches on. It and tide wait for no man, and at that point in the speech, the car hit a bump in the road, and the watchdog collapsed in a heap on the front seat with his alarm again ringing furiously. Are you all right? Shouted Milo. Oomph, grunted Talk. Sorry to get carried away, but I think you get the point. As they drove along, Talk continued to explain the importance of time, quoting the old philosophers and poets and illustrating each point with gestures that brought him perilously close to tumbling headlong from the speeding automobile. Before long, they saw in the distance the towers and flags of Dictionopolis, sparkling in the sunshine, and in a few moments they reached the Great Wall and stood at the gateway to the city. Ahem! Roared the gateman, clearing his throat and snapping smartly to attention. This is Dictionopolis, a happy kingdom, advantageously located in the foothills of confusion and caressed by gentle breezes from the sea of knowledge. Today, by royal proclamation, is market day. Have you come to buy or sell? I beg your pardon, said Mayo. Buy or sell, buy or sell, repeated the gateman impatiently. Which is it? You must have come here for some reason. Well, Milo began. Come now. If you don't have a reason, you must at least have an explanation, or certainly an excuse, interrupted the gateman. Milo shook his head. Very serious, the gentleman said, shaking his head also. You can't get in without a reason. He thought for a moment and then continued. Wait a minute. Maybe I have an old one you can use. He took a battered suitcase from the gatehouse and began to rummage busily through it, mumbling to himself, No. This won't do. No. This is fine. He cried triumphantly, holding up a small medallion on a chain. He dusted it off and engraved on one side were the words, Why not? That's a good reason for almost anything. A bit used, perhaps, but still quite serviceable. And with that, he placed it around Milo's neck, pushed back the heavy gate, bowed low, and motioned them into the city. I wonder what the market would be like, thought Milo, as they drove through the gate. But before there was time for an answer, they had driven into an immense square, crowded with long lines of stalls, heaped with merchandise and decorated in gay-coloured bunting. Overhead, a large banner proclaimed, Welcome to the World Market. And from across the square, 5 very tall, thin gentlemen dressed in silks and satins, plumed hats, and buckled shoes rushed up to the car, stopped short, mopped 5 brows, caught 5 breaths, unrolled 5 parchments, and began talking in turn. Greetings, salutations, welcome, good afternoon, hello. Milo nodded his head and went on reading from their scrolls. By order of Azaz, the unabridged, King of Dictionopolis, Monarch of Letters, Emperor of Phrases, Sentences, and miscellaneous figures of speech, we offer you the hospitality of our kingdom, country, nation, state, commonwealth, realm, empire, palatine, principality. Do all those words mean the same thing? Gasped Milo. Of course, certainly, precisely, exactly. Yes, they replied in order. Well then, said Milo, not understanding why each one said the same thing in a slightly different way. Wouldn't it be simpler to just use one? It would certainly make more sense. Nonsense, ridiculous, fantastic, absurd, bosh, they chorused again and continued. We're not interested in making sense. It's not our job, scolded the first. Besides, explained the second, one word is as good as another, so why not use them all? Then you don't have to choose which one is right, advised the third. Besides, sighed the fourth, if one is right, then 10 are 10 times as right. Obviously, you don't know who we are, sneered the fifth. And they presented themselves, one by one, as the Duke of Definition, the Minister of Meaning, the Earl of Essence, the Count of Connotation, the Undersecretary of Understanding. Milo acknowledged the introduction, and as talk growled softly, the minister explained, we are the king's advisers, or, in more formal terms, his cabinet. Cabinet, recited the Duke. 1. A small private room or closet case with drawers, etc. For keeping valuables, displaying curiosities. 2. Council room for chief ministers of state. 3. A body of official advisors to chief executive of a nation. You see, continued the minister, bowing thankfully to the Duke, Dictionopolis is the place where all words in the world come from. They're grown right here in our orchards. I didn't know that orchards were grown on I didn't know that words were grown on trees, said Milo timidly. Where did you think they grew? Shouted the Earl irritably. A small crowd began to gather to see the little boy who didn't know that letters grew on trees. More timidly, several people shook their heads sadly. I didn't know they grew at all, admitted Milo. Well, money doesn't grow on trees, does it? Demanded the Count. I've heard not, said Milo. Then something must. Why not words? Exclaimed the Undersecretary triumphantly. The crowds cheered his display of logic and continued about his business to continue. Continued the minister impatiently. Once a week by royal proclamation, the word market is held here in the great square, and people come from everywhere to buy the words they need or trade in the words they haven't used. Our job, said the Count, is to see that all the words sold are proper ones, for it wouldn't do to sell for a word that has no meaning or didn't exist at all. For instance, if you bought a word like Gizbik, where would you use it? It would be difficult, thought Milo, but there was so many words that were difficult, and he hardly knew any of them. But we never choose which ones to use, explained the Earl, as they walked toward the market stalls. For as long as they mean what they mean to mean, we don't care if they make sense or nonsense. Innocence or magnificence, added the Count. Retinence or common sense. said the undersecretary. That seems simple enough, said Milo, trying to be polite. Easy as falling off a log, cried the earl. Falling off a log with a loud thump. Must you be so clumsy? Shouted the Duke. All I said was, began the Earl, rubbing his head. We heard you, said the minister angrily, and you'll have to find an expression that's less dangerous. The Earl dusted himself off, as the other snickered audibly. You see, cautioned the Count, you must pick your words carefully, and be sure to say what you intend to say. And now we must leave to make preparations for the royal banquet. Of course. You'll be there, of course, said the minister. But before Milo had a chance to say anything, they were rushing off it, across the square, as fast as they had come. Enjoy yourself at the market, shouted back the undersecretary. Market, recited the Duke, an open space or covered building in which... And that was the last Milo heard as they disappeared into the crowd. I never knew words could be so confusing, Milo said to Talk as he bent down to scratch the dog's ear. Only when you use a lot to say a little, answered Talk. Milo thought this was quite the wisest thing he'd heard all day. Come, he shouted, let's see what the market looks like. It's very exciting. Confusion in the marketplace. Indeed it was, for as they approached, Milo could see crowds of people pushing and shouting their way among the stores. Buying and selling, trading and bargaining, huge wooden wheeled carts streamed into the market square from orchards and long caravans, bound for the four corners of the kingdom, made ready to leave. Sacks and boxes were piled high, waiting to be delivered to the ships that sailed the sea of knowledge, and off to one side of the group of minstrels sang songs, to the delight of those either too young or too old to engage in trade. But above all, the noise and tumult of the crowd could be heard, the merchants' voices loudly advertising in products. Voices loudly advertising their products. Get your fresh picked ifs, ands, or buts. Hey-ya, hey-ya, hey-ya. Nice ripe wares and wins. Juicy, tempting words for sale. So many words and so many people. They were from every place imaginable, and some places even beyond that. And they were all busy sorting, choosing, and stuffing things into cases. As soon as one filled, another was begun. There seemed to be no end to the bustle and activity. Milo and Talk wandered up and down the aisles, looking at the wonderful assortment of words for sale. There were short ones and easy ones for everyday use, and long and very important ones for special occasions, and even some marvelously fancy ones packed in individual gift boxes for use in royal decrees and pronouncements. Step right up, step right up, step right up. Fancy best quality roads right here, announced one man in a booming voice. Step right up, What can I do for you, little boy? How about a nice bag full of pronouns? Or maybe you'd like our special assortment of names. Milo had never thought much about words before, but these looked so good that he longed to have some. Look, Talk, he cried. Aren't they wonderful? They're fine. If you have something to say, replied Talk in a tired voice, for he was much more interested in finding a bone than in shopping for new words. Maybe if I buy some, I can learn how to use them, said Milo eagerly as he began to pick through the words in the store. Finally, he chose 3, which looked particularly good to him: quagmire, flabbergast, and upholstery. He had no idea what they meant, but they looked very grand and elegant. How much are these? He inquired, and when the man whispered the answer, he quickly put them back on the shelf and started to walk on. Why not take a few pounds of happies? Advised the salesman. They're much more practical and very useful for happy birthday, happy new year, happy days, and happy-go-lucky. I'd like to very much, began Milo, or perhaps you'd be interested in a package of goods. Always handy for good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and goodbye, he suggested. Milo did not want to buy anything, but the only money he had, Milo did want to buy something, but the only money he had was the coin he needed to get back through the toll booth, and talk, of course, had nothing but the time. No, thank you, replied Milo. We're just looking. And they continued on through the market. As they turned down the last of the stalls, Milo noticed a wagon that seemed different from the rest. On its side was a small, neatly lettered sign that said, "Do it yourself." And inside were 26 bins with all the letters of the alphabet, from A to Z. These are for people who like to make their own words, the man in charge informed. You can pick any assortment you like, or buy a special box, complete with all letters, punctuation marks, and a book of instructions. Here, taste an A. They're very good. Milo nibbled carefully at the letter and discovered it was quite sweet and delicious, just the way you'd expect an A to taste. I knew you'd like it, he laughed the letter man, popping 2 G's and an R into his mouth and letting the juice drip down his chin. A's are one of the most popular letters. All of them aren't that good, he confided in a low voice. Take the Z, for instance. Very dry and sawdusty. And the X? Why, it tastes like a trunk full of stale air. That's why people hardly ever use them, but most of the others are quite tasty. Try some more. He gave Milo an I, which was icy and refreshing, and took a crisp, crunchy C. Most people are just too lazy to make their own words, he continued, but it's much more fun. Is it difficult? I'm not much good at making words, admitted Milo, spitting the pits from the P. Perhaps I can be of some assistance. ASSISTANCE, buzzed an unfamiliar voice, and when Milo looked up, he saw an enormous bee, at least twice his size, sitting on top the wagon. I'm the spelling bee, announced the spelling bee. Don't be alarmed. ALARMED. Talk ducked under the wagon, and Milo, who was not overly fond of the normal-sized bees, began to back away slowly. I can spell anything. ANYTHING, he boasted, testing his wings. Try me. Can you spell good boy? Suggested Milo as he continued to back away. The bee gently lifted himself into the air and circled lazily over Milo's head. Perhaps, PERHAPS, you are under the misapprehension, APPREHENSION. That I am dangerous, he said, turning a smart loop to the left. Let me assure, ASSURE, that my intentions are peaceful. PEACEFUL. And with that, he settled back on top of the wagon and fanned himself with one wing. Now, he panted, think of the most difficult word you can and I'll spell it. Hurry up, hurry up. And he jumped up and down impatiently. He looks friendly enough, thought Milo. Not sure just how friendly a friendly bumblebee should be, but tried to think of a very difficult word to spell. Vegetable, he suggested, for it was one that always troubled him at school. That is a difficult one, he said the bee, winking at the letterman. Let me see now. He frowned and wiped his brow, paced slowly back and forth on top of the wagon. How much time do I have? Just 10 seconds, cried Milo excitedly. Count them off, Tuck. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, the bee repeated, continuing to pace nervously. Then just as the time ran out, he spelled as fast as he could. VEGETABLE. Correct, shouted the letterman. And everyone cheered. Can you spell everything? Asked Milo, admiringly. Just about, replied the bee, with a hint of pride in his voice. You see, years ago, I was just an ordinary bee, minding my own business, smelling flowers all day, and occasionally picking up part-time and working people's bonnets. Then one day, I realized that I never amount to be anything without an education, and being naturally adept at spelling, I decided that Balderdash! Shouted a booming voice. Around the wagon stepped a large beetle-like insect, dressed in a lavish coat, striped pants, checked vest, spats, and a derby hat. Let me repeat, Balderdash! He shouted again, swinging his cane and clicking his heels in midair. Come now, don't be ill-mannered. Isn't someone going to introduce me to a little boy? This, said the bee, with complete disdain, is the humbug, a very dislikable fellow. Nonsense! Everybody loves a humbug, shouted the humbug. As I was saying to the king just the other day. You never met the king, accused the bee angrily. Then, turning to Milo, he said, Don't believe a thing this old Ford says. Bush, he replied the humbug. We're an old and noble family, honourable to the core, insectuous, humbugium, if I may use the Latin. Why, we fought in the Crusades with Richard the Lionheart, crossed the Atlantic with Columbus, blazed trails with pioneers, and today many members of the family hold prominent government positions throughout the world. History is full of humbugs. A very pretty speech. SPEECH, sneered the bee. Now why don't you go away? I was just advising the lad of a bit importance of proper spelling. Bah! Said the bug, putting an arm around Milo. As soon as you learn to spell one word, they ask you to spell another. You can never catch up, so why bother? Take my advice, my boy, and forget about it. As my great-great-great-grandfather George Washington Humbug used to say. You, sir, shouted the bee very excitedly, are an impostor. I am Postor, who can't even spell his own name. A slavish concern for the composition of words is the sign of a bankrupt intellect, roared the humbug, waving his cane furiously. Milo didn't have any idea what this meant, but it seemed to infuriate the spelling bee, who flew down and knocked off the humbug's hat with his wing. "Be careful!" shouted Milo as the bug swung his cane again, catching the bee on the foot and knocking over the box of W's. "My foot!" shouted the bee. "My hat!" shouted the bug. And the fight was on. The spelling bee buzzed dangerously in and out of range, the humbug's wildly swinging cane as they menaced and threatened each other. The crowd stepped back out of danger. "There must be some other way to," began Milo, and then he yelled, "Watch out!" But it was too late. There was a tremendous crash, and the humbug, in his great fury, tripped into one of the stalls, knocking it into another, then another, then another, then another, until every stall in the marketplace had been upset, and the words lay scrambled in great confusion all over the square. The bee, who had tangled himself in some bunting, toppled to the ground, knocking Milo over on top of him, and lay there shouting, "Help! Help! There's a little boy on top of me!" The bug sprawled untidily on a mound of squashed letters and chalk. His alarm, ringing persistently, was buried under a pile of words. "Done what you've looked," angrily shouted one of the salesmen. He meant to say, "Look what you've done." But the words had gotten so hopelessly mixed up that no one could make any sense at all. "Still going to we what are?" complained another, as everyone set about straightening things up as well as they could. For several minutes, no one spoke an understandable sentence, which added greatly to the confusion. As soon as possible, however, the stalls were righted and words swept into a large pile for sorting. The spelling bee, who was quite upset by the whole affair, had flown off in a huff, and just as Milo got his feet, the entire police force of Dictionopolis appeared, loudly blowing its whistle. "Now we'll get to the bottom of this," he heard someone say. "Here comes Officer Shrift." Striding across the square was the shortest policeman Milo had ever seen. He was scarcely 2 feet tall and almost twice as wide, and he wore a blue uniform with a white belt and gloves, a peaked cap, and a very fierce expression. He continued blowing the whistle until his face was beet red, stopping only long enough to shout, "You're guilty! You're guilty!" at everyone who passed. "I've never seen anyone so guilty," he said as he reached Milo. Then turning towards Talk, who was still ringing loudly, he said, "Turn off that dog. It's disrespectful to sound your alarm in the presence of a policeman." He made a careful note of that in his black book and strode up and down, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the wreckage in the marketplace. Very pretty," he scowled. "Who's responsible for all of this? Speak up, or I'll arrest the lot of you." There was a long silence. Since hardly anybody had actually seen what had happened, no one spoke. "You," said the policeman, pointing an accusing finger at the humbug, who was brushing himself off and straightening his hat. "You look suspicious to me." The startled humbug dropped his cane and nervously replied, "Let me assure you, sir, on my honour as a gentleman, that I was merely an innocent bystander, minding my own business, enjoying the stimulating sights and sounds of the world of the calmness, when this young lad, silly little guy, he kind of sucks. Aha! Erupted the officer Shrift, making another note in his little book. Just as I thought, boys are the cause of everything. Pardon me, insisted the humbug, but I in no way meant to imply that. Silence, thundered the policeman, pulling himself up to full height and glaring menacingly at the terrified bug. And now, he continued, speaking to Marlowe, where were you on the night of July 27th? What does that have to do with it? Asked Milo. It's my birthday, that's what, said the policeman as he entered. Forgot my birthday in his little book. Boys always forget other people's birthdays. You have committed the following crimes, he continued, having a dog with an unauthorized alarm, sowing confusion, upsetting the apple cart, wreaking havoc, and mincing words. Now see here, growled Talk angrily. And illegal barking, he added, frowning at the watchdog. It's against the law to bark without using the barking meter. Are you ready to be sentenced? Only a judge can sentence you, said Milo, who remembered reading that in one of his school books. Good point, he replied, the policeman, taking off his cap and putting on a long black robe. I am also a judge. Now, would you like a long or short sentence? A short one, if you please, said Milo. Good, said the judge, rapping his gavel 3 times. I always have trouble remembering the long ones. How about I am? That's the shortest sentence I know. Everyone agreed that it was a fair sentence, and the judge continued. There will also be a small additional penalty of 6 million years in prison. Case closed, he pronounced, rapping his gavel again. Come with me, I'll take you to the dungeon. Only a jailer can put you in the dungeon. Only a jailer can put you in the prison, offered Milo, quoting the same book. Good point, said the judge, removing his robe and taking out a large bunch of keys. I am also the jailer. And with that, he led them away. Keep your chin up, shouted the humbug. Maybe they'll take 1 million years off for good behavior. The heavy prison door swung back slowly, and Milo and Talk followed Officer Shrift down a long dark corridor lit by only an occasional flickering candle. Watch the steps, advised the policeman, as they started down a steep circular staircase. The air was dank and musty, like the smell of wet blankets, and the massive stone walls were slimy to the touch. Down and down they went until they arrived at another door, even heavier and stronger looking than the first. A cobweb brushed across Milo's face, and he shuddered. Ugh. You'll find it quite pleasant here, chuckled the policeman, as he slid the bolt back and pushed the door open with a screech and a squeak. Not much company, but you can always chat with the witch. The witch? Trembled Milo. Yes, she's been here for a long time, he said, starting along another corridor. In a few more minutes, they had gone through 3 other doors, across a narrow footbridge down 2 more corridors and another stairway, and stood finally in front of a small cell door. "This is it," said the policeman. "All the comforts of home." The door opened and then shut, and Milo and Tick found themselves. Excuse me. Milo and Talk found themselves in a high vaulted cell with 2 tiny windows halfway up the walls. "See you in 6 million years," said the officer Shrift, and the sound of his footsteps grew fainter and fainter until it wasn't heard at all. "It looks serious, doesn't it, Talk?" said Milo very sadly. "It certainly does," the dog replied, sniffing around to see what their new quarters were like. "I don't know what we're going to do, for all the time we don't even have a checker set or a box of crayons." "Don't worry," growled Talk, raising one paw assuringly. "Something will turn up. Here, wind me, you please. I'm beginning to run down." "You know something, Talk," he said as he wound up the dog. You can get in a lot of trouble mixing up words or just not knowing how to spell them. If we ever get out of here, I'm going to make sure to learn all about them." "A very commendable ambition, young man," said a small voice from across the cell. Milo looked up, very surprised, and noticed, for the first time in the half-lit room, a pleasant-looking old lady, quietly knitting and rocking. "Hello," he said. "How do you do?" she replied. "You'd better be careful," Milo advised. "I understand there's a witch somewhere in here." "I am she," the old lady answered casually, and pulled her shawl a little closer around her shoulders. Milo jumped back in a fright and quickly grabbed Talk to make sure that his alarm didn't go off, for he knew how much witches hate loud noises. "Don't be frightened," she thought. She laughed. "I'm not a witch, I'm a witch." "Oh," said Milo, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. "I'm faintly macabre. The not-so-wicked witch," she continued, "and I'm certainly not going to harm you." "What's a witch?" asked Milo, releasing Talk and stepping a little closer. "Well," said the old lady, just as a rat scurried across her foot, "I am the king's great aunt. For years and years I was in charge of choosing which words were to be used for all occasions, which ones to say and which ones not to say, which ones to write and which ones not to write. As you can well imagine, with all the thousands to choose from, it was a most important and responsible job. I was given the title of official witch, which made me very proud and happy. At first, I did my best to make sure that the most proper and fitting words were used. Everything was said clearly and simply, and no words were wasted. I had signs posted all over the palace and marketplace which said, "Brevity is the soul of wit." But the power corrupts, and soon I grew miserly and chose fewer and fewer words, trying to keep as many as possible for myself. I had new signs posted which said, "An ill-chosen word is the fool's messenger." Soon sales began to fall off in the market. The people were afraid to buy as many as words before, and hard times came to the kingdom. But still I grew more and more miserly. Soon there were so few words chosen that hardly anything could be said, and even casual conversation became difficult. Again, I had new signs posted which said, "Speak fitly or be silent wisely." And finally, I had even these replaced by ones which read simply, "Silence is golden." All talk stopped. No words were sold, and the marketplace shut down, and the people grew poor and disconsolate. When the king saw what had happened, he became furious and had me cast into this dungeon, where you see me now, an older and wiser woman. That was all many years ago, she continued, but they never appointed a new witch, and that explains why today people use as many words as they can, and think themselves very wise for doing so. For always remember that while it is wrong to use too few, it is often far worse to use too many. When she had finished, she sighed deeply, patted Milo gently on the shoulder, and began knitting once again. "And have you been down here ever since then?" asked Milo sympathetically. "Yes," she said sadly. "Most people have forgotten me entirely, or remember me wrongly as a witch. Not a witch. But it matters not, she went on unhappily, for they are equally frightened of both." "I don't think you're frightening," said Milo, and Tok wagged his tail in agreement. "I thank you very much," said Faintly Macabre. "You may call me Aunt Faintly. Here, have a punctuation mark," and she held out a box of sugar-coated question marks, periods, commas, and exclamation points. "That's all I get to eat now. Well, when I get out of here, I'm going to help you," Milo declared forcefully. "That's very nice of you," she replied, "but the only thing that can help me is the return of rhyme and reason." "The return of what?" asked Milo. "Rhyme and reason," she repeated. "But that's another long story, and you may not want to hear it." "We would like to very much," barked Tok. "We really would," agreed Milo. And as the witch rocked slowly back and forth, she told them this story. Once upon a time, this land was barren and frightening. Wilderness whose high rocky mountains sheltered the evil winds and whose barren valleys offered hospitality to no man. Few things grew, and those that did were bent and twisted, and their fruit was as bitter as wormwood. What wasn't waste was desert, and what wasn't desert was rock. And demons of darkness made their home in the hills. Evil creatures roamed at will through the countryside and down to the sea. It was known as the land of Null. Then one day a small ship appeared on the sea of knowledge. It carried a young prince seeking the future. In the name of goodness and truth, he laid claim to all the country and set out to explore his new domain. The demons, the monsters, and giants were furious at his presumption and banded together to drive him out. The earth shook with their battle, and when they had finished, all that remained to the prince was a small piece of land at the edge of the sea. "I'll build my city here," he declared, and that is what he did. Before long, more ships came bearing settlers for the new land, and the city grew and pushed its boundaries farther and farther out. Each day it was attacked anew, but nothing could destroy the prince's new city. And grow it did. It was no longer just a city, it was a kingdom. It was called the Kingdom of Wisdom. But outside the walls, all was not safe. And the new king vowed to conquer the land that was rightfully his. So each spring he set forth with his army, and each autumn he returned. And year by year the kingdom grew larger and more prosperous. He took to himself a wife, and before long had 2 fine young sons, to whom he taught everything he knew, so that one day they might rule wisely. When the boys grew to young manhood, the king called them to him and said, "I am becoming an old man and can no longer go forth to battle. You must take my place and found new cities in the wilderness, for the kingdom of wisdom must grow." And so they did. One went south to the foothills of confusion and built Dictionopolis, the city of words, and one went north to the mountains of ignorance and built Digitopolis, the city of numbers. Both cities flourished mightily, and the demons were driven back still further. Soon cities and towns were founded in new lands, and at last only the farthest reaches of wilderness remained to these terrible creatures. And there they waited, ready to strike down all who had ventured near or relaxed their guard. The 2 brothers were glad, however, to go their separate ways, for they were by nature very suspicious and jealous. Each one tried to outdo the other, and they worked so hard and diligently at it that before long their cities rivaled even wisdom in size and grandeur. "Words are more important than wisdom," said one privately. "Numbers are more important than wisdom," thought another to himself. And they grew to dislike each other more and more. The old king, however, who knew nothing of his son's animosity, he was very happy in the twilight of his reign, and spent his days quietly walking and contemplating the royal gardens. His only regret was that he'd never had a daughter, for he had loved little girls as much as he loved little boys. One day, as he was strolling peacefully about the grounds, he discovered 2 tiny babies that had been abandoned in a basket under the grape arbor. They were beautiful golden-haired girls. The king was overjoyed. "They have been sent to crown my old age," he cried, and called the queen, his ministers, the palace, the staff, and indeed the entire population to see them. "We'll call this one Rhyme and this one Reason," he said. So they became the Princess of Sweet Rhyme and the Princess of Pure Reason, and were brought up in the palace. When the old king finally died, the kingdom was divided between his 2 sons, with the provision that they would be equally responsible for the welfare of the young princesses. One son went south and became Azaz, the Unabridged, king of Dictionopolis, and the other went north and became Mathemagician, ruler of Digitopolis. And true to their words, they both provided well for the little girls, who continued to live in wisdom. Everyone loved the princesses because of their great beauty, their gentle ways, and their ability to settle all controversies fairly and reasonably. People with problems or grievances or arguments came from all over the land to seek advice. And even the two brothers, who by this time were fighting continuously, often called upon. Often called upon them to decide matters of the state. It was said by everyone that rhyme and reason answer all problems. As the years passed, the two brothers grew further and further apart. Them to help decide matters of the state. It was said by everyone that rhyme and reason answer all problems. As the years passed, the two brothers grew farther and farther apart. And their separate kingdoms became richer and grander. Their disputes, however, became more and more difficult to reconcile. But always, with patience and love, the princesses set things right. Then one day, they had the most terrible quarrel of all. King Azores insisted that words were far more significant than numbers, and hence his kingdom was truly the greater. And the math magician complained that numbers were much more important than words, and hence his kingdom was supreme. They discussed and debated and raved and ranted until they were on the verge of blows. When it was decided to submit the question to arbitration by the princesses, after days of careful consideration, in which all the evidence was weighed and all witnesses heard, they made their decision. Words and numbers are of equal value, for in the cloak of knowledge, one is warp and the other is woof. It is no more important to count the sands than it is to name the stars. Therefore, let both kingdoms live in peace. Everyone was pleased with the verdict, everyone that is but the brothers, who were besides themselves with anger. What good are these girls if they cannot settle an argument in someone's favour, they growled, since both were more interested in their own advantage than in the truth. We'll banish them from the kingdom forever. And so they were taken from their palace and sent far away to the castle in the air. And they have not been seen since. That is why today, in all this land, there is neither rhyme nor reason. Then what happened to the two rulers? Asked Milo. Banishing the two princesses was the last thing they ever agreed upon, and they soon fell to warring with each other. Despite this, their own kingdoms have continued to prosper, but the old city of wisdom has fallen into great disrepair, and there is no one to set things right. So you see, until the princess's return, I shall have to stay here. Maybe we can rescue them, said Milo as he saw how sad the witch looked. Ah, that would be difficult, she replied. The castle in the air is far from here, and the only one stairway which leads to it is guarded by fierce and black-hearted demons. Tuk growled ominously, for he hated even the thought of demons. I'm afraid there's not much a little boy and a dog can do, she said. But never you mind, it's not so bad. I've grown quite used to it here. But you must be going, or else you'll waste the whole day. Oh, but we're here for 6 million years, sighed Milo. And I don't see any way to escape. Nonsense, scolded the witch. You mustn't take Officer Schiff so seriously. Officer Shrift so seriously. He loves to put people in prison, but he doesn't care about keeping them here. Now just press that button in the wall and be on your way. Milo pressed the button and the door swung open, letting in a shaft of brilliant sunshine. Goodbye. Come again, she shouted. The witch as they stepped outside and the door slammed shut. Milo and Tok stood blinking in the bright light as their eyes became accustomed to it. The first things they saw were the king's advisors, again rushing towards them. Ah, there you are! Where have you been? We've been looking all over for you. The royal banquet is about to begin. Come with us. They seemed very agitated and out of breath as Milo walked along with them. But what about my car? He asked. Don't need it, replied the Duke. No use for it, said the minister. Superfluous, advised the Count. Unnecessary, stated the Earl. Uncalled for, cried the Undersecretary. We'll take our vehicle. We'll take our vehicle. Vehicle. Conveyance, rig, charbonk, chariot, buggy, coach, brougham, chandrian. They repeated quickly in order and pointed to a small wooden wagon. Oh dear, all those words again, thought Milo as soon as he climbed into the wagon with Tok. And the cabinet members, how are you going to make it move? It doesn't have a be very quiet, advised the Duke, for it goes without saying. And sure enough, as soon as they were all quite still, it began to move quickly through the streets. In a very short time they arrived at the royal palace. Right this way, follow us, come along, step lively. Here we go, they shouted, hopping from the wagon and bounding up the broad marble stairway. Milo and Tok followed close behind. It was a strange-looking palace, and if he didn't know better, Milo would have said that it looked like an enormous book, standing on end, with its front door in the lower part of the binding, just where they usually place the publisher's name. Once inside, they hurried down along the hallway, which glittered with crystal chandeliers and echoed with their footsteps. The walls and the ceilings were covered with mirrors whose reflections danced dizzily along with them, and the footmen bowed coldly. We must be terribly late, gasped the Earl nervously as they reached the tall doors of the banquet hall. It was a vast room, full of people loudly talking and arguing. The long table was carefully set with gold plates and linen napkins, and attendants stood behind each chair. And at the centre, raised slightly above the others, was a throne covered in crimson cloth. Directly behind, on the wall, was the royal coat of arms. Flanked by flags of Dictionopolis, Milo noticed many of the people he had seen in the marketplace. The letterman was busy explaining to an interested group the history of the W, and off in the corner, the humbug and the spelling bee were arguing fiercely about nothing at all. Officer Shrift wandered through the crowd, suspiciously muttering, "Guilty, guilty, they're all guilty," and on noticing Milo, brightened visibly and commented in passing, "Is it 6 million years already? My, how time flies." Everyone seemed quite grumpy about having to wait for lunch, and they were all relieved to see the tardy guests arrive. "Certainly glad you finally made it, old man," said the humbug, cordially pumping Milo's hand. "As guest of honor, you must choose the menu, of course." "Oh my," he thought, not knowing what to say. "Be quick about it," suggested the spelling bee. "I'm famished." Famished. As Milo tried to think, there were ear-shattering blasts of trumpet, entirely off key, and a page announced to the startled guests, "King Azaz, the unabridged." The king strode through the door and over to the table and settled his great bulk onto the throne, calling irritably, "Places, everyone, take your places." He was the largest man Milo had ever seen, with a great stomach, large, piercing eyes, and a grey beard reached to his waist, and a silver signet ring on the little finger of his left hand. He also wore a small crown and a robe with the letters of the alphabet beautifully embroidered all over it. What have we here?" he said, staring down at Took and Milo as everyone took his place. "If you please," said Milo, "my name is Milo, and this is Took. Thank you very much for inviting us to your banquet, and I think your palace is very beautiful." "Exquisite," corrected the Duke. "Lovely," counselled the minister. "Handsome," recommended the Count. "Pretty," hinted the Earl. "Charming," submitted the Undersecretary. "Silence," suggested the King. "Now, young man, what can you do to entertain us? Sing songs? Tell stories? Compose sonnets? Juggle plates? Do tumbling tricks? Which is it?" "I can't do any of those things," admitted Milo. "What an ordinary little boy," commented the King. "Why, my cabinet members can do all sorts of things. The Duke here can make mountains out of molehills. The minister splits hairs. The Count makes hay while the sun shines. The Earl leaves no stone unturned. And the Undersecretary," he finished ominously, "hangs by a thread. Can't you do anything at all?" "I can count to 1,000, offered Milo. "Ah, numbers! Never mention numbers here. Only use them when we absolutely have to," growled Azaz disgustedly. "Now why don't you and Took come up here and sit next to me, and we'll have some dinner." "Are you ready with the menu?" reminded the humbug. "Well, said Milo, remembering that his mother had always told him to eat lightly when he was a guest. "Why don't we have a light meal?" "A light meal, it shall be," roared the bug, waving his arms. The waiters rushed in, carrying large serving platters, and set them on the table in front of the King. When he lifted the covers, Shafts of brilliant coloured light leaped from the plates and bounced around the ceilings, the walls, across the floor, and out the windows. Not a very sustainable meal. Not a very substantial meal, said the humbug, rubbing his eyes, but quite an attractive one. Perhaps you can suggest something a little more filling. The king clapped his hands, the platters were removed, and without thinking, Milo quickly suggested, "Well, in that case, I think we ought to have a square meal 'tis," shouted the humbug again. The king clapped his hands once more, and the waiters reappeared, carrying plates heaped high with steaming squares of all sizes and colours. "Ugh," said the spelling bee, tasting one. "These are awful." No one else seemed to like them very much either, and the humbug got one caught in his throat and almost choked. "Time for the speeches," announced the king. As the plates were again removed and everyone looked glum, "You first," he commanded, pointing to Milo. "Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen," started Milo timidly, "I would like to take this opportunity to say that in all the—" "That's quite enough," snapped the king. "Mustn't take all day." "But I had just begun," objected Milo. "Next," bellowed the king. "Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, vanilla ice cream," recited the humbug, bouncing up and down quickly. What a strange speech, thought Milo, for he had many in the past and knew that they were supposed to be long and dull. "Hamburgers, corn on the cob, chocolate pudding, pudding," said the spelling bee in his turn. "Frankfurters, sour pickles, strawberry jam," shouted Officer Strift from his chair. Since he was taller sitting than standing, he didn't bother to get up. And so down the line it went, with each guest rising briefly, making a short speech, and then resuming their place. When everyone finished, the king rose. "Pâté de foie gras, soupe à la lion, faisson sur cloche, salade endive, fromage et fruits, et des méthodes," he said carefully, and clapped his hands again. The waiters reappeared immediately, carrying heavy hot trays, which they set on the table, each one containing the exact words spoken by the various guests. And they all began eating immediately with great gusto. "Dig in," said the king, poking Milo with his elbow and looking disapprovingly at his plate. "I can't say that I think much of your choice." "I didn't know that I was going to have to eat my words," objected Milo. Of course, everyone here does," said the king, grunted. "You should have made a tastier speech." Milo looked around at everyone, busily stuffing themselves, and then began to look back at his own unappetizing plate. It certainly didn't look worth eating, and he was so very hungry. "Here, try some somersault," suggested the Duke. "It improves the flavour. "Have rigmarole," offered the Count, passing the bread basket. "Or ragamuffin," seconded the minister. "Perhaps you'd care for a cinnamon bun," suggested the Duke. "Why not wait for your just desserts?" mumbled the Earl indistinctly, his mouth full of food. "How many times must I tell you not to bite off more than you can chew?" snapped the Under-Secretary, patting the distressed Earl on the back. "In one ear and out the other," scolded the Duke, attempting to stuff one of the words through the Earl's head. "If it isn't one thing, it's another," chided the minister. Out of the frying pan into the fire, shouted the Count, burning himself badly. Well, you don't have to bite off my head, screamed the terrified Earl, and flew at the others in a rage. The 5 of them scuffled wildly under the table. Stop that at once, thundered Azaz, or I'll banish the lot of you. Sorry, excuse me, forgive us. Pardon, regrets. They apologized in turn and sat down glaringly at each other. The rest of the meal was finished in silence, until the king, wiping the gravy stains from his vest, called for dessert. Milo, who had not eaten anything, looked up eagerly. We're having a special treat today, said the king, as the delicious smells of homemade pastry filled the banquet hall. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night in the half-bakery to make sure that the half-bakery? Questioned Milo. Of course, the half-bakery, snapped the king. Where do you think half-baked ideas come from? Now please don't interrupt. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night to... What's a half-baked idea? Asked Milo again. Will you be quiet? Growled Azaz angrily. But before he could begin again, 3 large serving carts were wheeled into the hall, and everyone jumped up to help themselves. They're very tasty, explained Humbug, but they don't always agree with you. Here's one that's very good, he handed it to Milo. Through the icing and nuts, Milo saw that it said, "The earth is flat." People swallowed that one for years, commented the spelling bee, but it's not very popular these days. DAYS. He picked up a long one that stated, "The moon is made of green cheese," and hungrily bit off the part that said cheese. Now there's half a baked idea, he said, smiling. Milo looked at the great assortment of cakes, which were being eaten almost as quickly as anyone could read them. The Count was munching contentedly on "It never rains, but it pours," and the king was busy slicing one that stated, "Night air is bad air." I wouldn't eat too many of those if I were you, Voice took. They may look good, but you can get terribly sick from them. Don't worry, Milo replied. I'll just wrap one up for later. And he folded his napkin. Everything happens for the best. Couldn't eat another thing, puffed the Duke, clutching his stomach. Oh my, oh dear, agreed the minister, breathing with great difficulty. Mumbled the Earl, desperately trying to swallow another mouthful. Thoroughly stuffed, sighed the Count, loosening his belt. Full up, grunted the Undersecretary, reaching for the last cake. As everyone finished, the only sounds that were to be heard were the creaking of chairs, the pushing of plates, and the licking of spoons, and of course, a few words from Humbug. A delightful repast, delicately prepared and elegantly served, he announced to no one in particular. A feast of rare banquet. My compliments to the chef. By all means, my compliments to the chef. Then, with a most distressed look on his face, he turned to Milo and gasped, Would you kindly fetch me a glass of water? I seem to have a touch of indigestion. Perhaps you've eaten too much too quickly, Milo remarked sympathetically. Too much too quickly, wheezed the uncomfortable bug between gulps. To be sure, too much too quickly. I most certainly should have eaten too little too slowly, or too much too slowly, or too little too quickly, or taken all day to eat nothing. or eaten everything in no time at all, or occasionally eaten something anytime, or perhaps I should have. And he toppled back, exhausted, into his chair and continued to mumble indistinctly. Attention! Let me have your attention, insisted the king, leaping to his feet and pounding the table. The command was entirely unnecessary, but the moment he began to speak, everyone but Milo took, and the distraught Bug rushed from the hall, down the stairs, and out of the palace. Loyal subjects and friends, continued Azores, his voice echoing in the almost empty room. Once again, on this gala occasion, pardon me, coughed Milo, as politely as possible, but everyone has gone. I was hoping no one would notice, said the king sadly. It happens every time. They've all gone to dinner, announced the humbug weakly. And just as soon as I catch my breath, I shall join them. That's ridiculous. How can they eat dinner right after a banquet? Asked Milo. Scandalous, shouted the king. We'll put a stop to it at once. From now on, by royal command, everyone must eat dinner before the banquet. But that's just as bad, protested Milo. You mean just as good, corrected the humbug. Things which are equally bad are also equally good. Try to look at the bright side of things. I don't know which side of anything to look at, protested Milo. Everything is so confusing and all your words only make things worse. How true, said the unhappy king, resting his regal chin on his royal fist, as he thought fondly of the old days. There must be something we can do about it. Pass a law, said the humbug, suggested brightly. We have almost as many laws as words, grumbled the king. Offer a reward, offered the bug again. The king shook his head and looked sadder and sadder. Send for help, drive a bargain, pull the switch, file a brief, lower the boom, tow the line, raise the bridge, bar the door, shouted the humbug, jumping up and down and waving his arms. Then he promptly sat down as the king glanced furiously in his direction. Perhaps you might allow rhyme and reason to return, said Milo softly, for he had been waiting for just an opportunity to suggest it. How nice that would be, said Azores, straightening up and adjusting his crown. Even if they were a bother at times, things always went so well when they were here. As he spoke, he leaned back on the throne, clasped his hands behind his head, and stared thoughtfully at the ceiling. I'm afraid it can't be done. Certainly not. It can't be done, repeated the humbug. Why not? Asked Milo. Why not indeed? Exclaimed the bug, who seemed equally at home on either side of the argument. Much too difficult, replied the king. Of course, emphasized the bug. Much too difficult. You could if you really wanted to, insisted Milo. By all means, if you really wanted to, you could, the humbug agreed. How? Asked Azores, glaringly at the bug. How? Inquired Milo, looking the same way. A simple task, began the humbug, suddenly wishing he was somewhere else, for a brave lad, with a stout heart and a steadfast dog and a serviceable small automobile. Go on, recommended the king. Yes, please, seconded Milo. All that he would have to do, continued the wary bug, is travel through miles of harrowing and hazardous countryside into unknown valleys and uncharted forests, past yawning chasms and trackless wastes, until he reached Digitopolis, if, of course, he ever reached there. Then he would have to persuade the math magician to agree to release the little princesses, and of course, he'd never agree to anything that you agreed with. And anyway, if he did, you certainly wouldn't agree to it. From there, it's a simple matter of entering the mountain of ignorance. Full of perilous pitfalls and ominous overtones, a land to which many venture but few return. And those evil demons slither slowly from peak to peak in search of prey. Then an effortless climb up 2,000-step circular stairway without railings in a high-end window at night. For in those mountains it is always night, to the castle in the air. He paused momentarily for breath, then began again. After a pleasant chat with the princesses, all that remains is a leisurely ride back through those chaotic crags, whose frightening fiends have sworn to tear any intruder limb from limb and devour him down to his belt buckle. And finally, after the long ride back, a triumphal parade, if of course there is anything left to parade, followed by hot chocolate and cookies for everyone. The humbug bowed low and sat down once again, very pleased with himself. "I never realized it would be so simple," said the king, stroking his beard and smiling broadly. "Quite simple indeed," concurred the bug. "It sounds dangerous to me," said Milo. Most dangerous, mumbled the humbug, still trying to be in agreement with everybody. "Who will make the journey?" asked Torque, who had been listening very carefully to the humbug's description. "A very good description. A very good question," replied the king. "But there is one far more serious problem." "What is it?" asked Milo, who was rather unhappy at the turn of the conversation had taken. "I'm afraid I can tell you that only when you return," cried the king, clapping his hands 3 times. As he did so, the waiters rushed back into the room and quickly cleared away the dishes, the silver, the tablecloth, the table, the chairs, the banquet hall, and the palace, leaving them all suddenly standing in the marketplace. "Of course you realize that I would like to make the trip myself," continued Azaz, striding across the square as if nothing had happened. "But since it was your idea, you shall have to have all the honor and fame." "But you see," began Milo. "Dictionopolis will always be grateful, my boy," interrupted the king, throwing one arm around Milo and patting Talk on the other. "You will face many dangers on your journey, but fear not, for I have brought you this for your protection." He drew from inside his coat a small heavy box about the size of a school book and handed it ceremoniously to Milo. "In this box are all the words I know," he said. "Most of them you will never need. Some you will use constantly, but with them you may ask all the questions which have never been answered, and answer all the questions which have never been asked. All the great books of the past and all the ones yet to come are made with these words. With them is no obstacle you cannot overcome. All you must learn to do is use them well and in the right places." Milo accepted the gift with thanks, and the little group walked to the car, still parked at the edge of the square. "You will, of course, need a guide," said the king, and since he knows the obstacles so well, the humbug has cheerfully volunteered to accompany you. Now see here, cried the startled bug, for that was the last thing in the world he wanted to do. You will find him dependable, brave, resourceful, and loyal, continued the Saws, and the humbug was so overcome by the flattery that he quite forgot to object again. I'm sure he'll be a great help, cried Milo as they drove across the square. I hope so, thought Tock to himself, for he was far less sure. Good luck, do be careful, shouted the king, and down the royal road they went. Milo and Tock wondered what strange adventures lay ahead. The humbug speculated on how he'd ever become involved in such a hazardous undertaking. And the crowd waved and cheered wildly, for while they didn't care at all about anyone arriving, they were always very pleased to see someone go. Soon all traces of Dictionopolis had vanished in the distance, and all the strange and unknown lands that lay between the kingdom of words and the kingdom of numbers stretched before them. It was late afternoon, and the dark orange sun floated heavily over the distant mountains. A friendly cool breeze slapped playfully at the car, and the long shadows stretched out lazily from the trees and bushes. Ah, the open road, exclaimed the humbug, breathing deeply, but now he seemed happily resigned to the trip. The spirit of adventure, the lure of the unknown, the thrill of a gallant quest. How very grand indeed. Then, pleased with himself, he folded his arms, sat back, and left it at that. In a few more minutes, they had left the open countryside and driven into a dense forest. This is the scenic route, straight ahead to the point of view, announced a rather large road sign, but contrary to its statement, all that could be seen were more trees. As the car rushed along, the trees grew thicker and taller and leafier until just as they had hidden the sky completely, the forest abruptly ended and the road bent itself around a broad promontory stretching below to the left, to the right, and then straight ahead, as far as anyone could see, lay the rich green landscape through which they had been travelling. Remarkable view, announced the humbug, bouncing from the car as if he was responsible for the whole thing. Isn't it beautiful? Gasped Milo. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, I don't know, answered a strange voice. It's all in the way you look at things. I beg your pardon, asked Milo. He didn't see who had spoken. I said, it's all in the way you look at things, repeated the voice. Milo turned around and found himself staring at two very neatly positioned brown shoes for standing directly in front of him. If you can use the word standing for anyone suspended in mid-air, was another boy just about his age whose feet were easily 3 feet off the ground. For instance, continued the boy, if you happen to like deserts, you might not think this was as beautiful as all. That's true, said the humbug, who didn't like to contradict anyone whose feet were that far off the ground. For instance, said the boy again, if Christmas trees were people and people were Christmas trees, we'd all be chopped down, put up in the living room, and covered with tinsel, while the trees opened our presents. What does that have to do with it? Asked Milo. Nothing at all, he answered. But it's an interesting possibility, don't you think? "How do you manage to stand up there?" asked Milo. "I was about to ask you a similar question," answered the boy, "for you must be much older than you look to be standing on the ground." "What do you mean?" asked Milo. "Well," said the boy, "in my family, everyone is born in the air, with his head at exactly the height it's going to be when he's an adult. And then we all grow toward the ground. When we're fully grown up, as you can see, grown down, our feet finally touch. Of course, there are a few of us whose feet never reach the ground, no matter how old we get. But I suppose it's the same in every family." He hopped a few steps in the air, skipped back to where he started, and then began again. "You certainly must be very old to have reached the ground already." "Oh no," said Milo seriously. "In my family, we all start on the ground and grow up, and we never know how far until we actually get there." "What a silly system," the boy laughed. "Then your head keeps changing its weight, and you always see things in a different way. Why, when you're 15, things won't look all the way they did when you were 10. And at 20, everything will change again." "I suppose so," replied Milo, for he had never really thought about the matter. "We always see things from the same angle," the boy continued. "It's much less trouble that way. Besides, it makes more sense to grow down and not up. When you're very young, you can never hurt yourself falling down if you're in midair, and you certainly can't get into trouble for scuffing up your shoes or marking the floor if there's anything to scuff them on, and the floor is 3 feet away." "That's very true," thought Tok, who wondered how the dogs in the family liked the arrangement. "But there are many other ways to look at things," remarked the boy. "For instance, you had orange juice, boiled eggs, toast and jam and milk for breakfast," he said, turning to Milo. "And you are always worried about other people wasting time," he said to Tok. "And you are almost never right about anything," he said, pointing at the humbug. "And when you are, it's usually an accident." "A gross exaggeration," protested the furious bug, who didn't realize that so much was visible to the naked eye. "Amazing," gasped Tok. "How did you know all that?" asked Milo. "Simple," he said proudly. "I'm Alec Bings. I see through things. I can see whatever is inside, behind, around, covered by, or subsequent to anything else. In fact, the only thing I can't see is whatever happens to be right in front of my nose." "Isn't that a little inconvenient?" asked Milo, whose neck was becoming quite stiff from looking up. "It is a little," replied Alec, "but it is quite important to know what lies behind things, and the family helps me take care of the rest. My father helps me see things, my father sees to things, my mother looks after things, my brother sees beyond things, my uncle sees the other side of every question, and my little sister Alice sees under things." "How can she see under things if she's all the way up there?" growled the humbug. "Well," added Alec, turning a neat cartwheel, "whatever she can't see under, she overlooks." "Would it be possible for me to see something from up there?" asked Milo politely. "You could," said Alec, "but only if you try very hard to look at things as an adult does." Milo tried as hard as he could, and as he did his feet floated slowly off the ground until he was standing in the air next to Alec Bings. He looked around very quickly and an instant later crashed back down to earth again. "Interesting, wasn't it?" asked Alec. "Yes, it was," agreed Milo, rubbing his head and dusting himself off. But I think I'll continue to see things as a child. It's not so far to fall. A wise decision, at least for the time being, said Alec. Everyone should have his own point of view. Isn't this everyone's point of view? Asked Tuck, looking around curiously. Of course not, replied Alec, sitting himself down on nothing. It's only mine, and you certainly can't always look at things from someone else's point of view. For instance, from here that looks like a bucket of water, he said, pointing at the bucket of water. But from an ant's point of view, it's a vast ocean. From an elephant's, just a cool drink. And to a fish, of course, it's a home. So you see, the way you see things depends on a great deal on where you look at them from. Now come along, and I'll show you the rest of the forest. He ran quickly through the air, stopping occasionally to beckon Milo, Tuck, and the humbug along. They followed as well as anyone who had to stay on the ground could. Does everyone here grow the way you do? Puffed Milo when he had caught up. Almost everyone, replied Alec, and then he stopped a moment and thought, now and then, though, someone does begin to grow differently. Instead of down, his feet grew up toward the sky. But we do our best to discourage awkward things like that. What happens to them? Insisted Milo. Oddly enough, they often grow 10 times the size of everyone else, said Alec thoughtfully, and I've heard that they walk among the stars. And with that, he skipped off once again toward the waiting woods. As they ran, tall trees closed in around them and arched gracefully towards the sky. The late afternoon sunlight leaped from leaf to leaf, slid along branches and down trunks, and dropped finally to the ground in warm, luminous